I stood there on the weathered boardwalk in Cannon Beach, Oregon, the cold, salt wind stinging my cheeks like tiny needles. My heart stopped the moment I looked through the large glass windows of the brand-new store. Ocean Legacy. Inside, under warm golden lights, every single piece I had poured 7 long years of my life into was now on perfect display. The wave earrings I shaped from sea glass I collected at sunrise. The necklaces that carried the soft glow of agates I had polished by hand in my tiny workshop until my fingers bled. The bracelets that turned ocean trash into something that looked like captured moonlight. And above them all, in elegant brushed gold letters, one name shone brighter than the rest. Thalia Quill. My legs felt weak. The world narrowed until all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears and the distant crash of waves behind me. I pushed the door open. The little bell above it rang sweetly, almost cheerfully. The store smelled of fresh cedar and expensive candles. A few customers turned, smiling softly as they touched the pieces, whispering how magical they were. In the center of the room stood my sister Thalia, radiant in a flowing cream dress, laughing lightly while she posed for the local news crew. Right beside her was our mother, Nyra Quill. She smiled with perfect warmth, one arm wrapped around Thalia's waist, speaking clearly into the microphone. "This has always been a family dream," she said, her voice full of pride. "We're so blessed to finally bring it to life and share it with everyone." Those words hit me like a wave I never saw coming. I took a shaky step forward, my voice barely above a whisper at first. Those are my designs." A few heads turned. I tried again. Louder this time, my throat tight with disbelief. "Those pieces are mine. I made them." Thalia's smile faltered for the briefest second. Then it returned, soft and graceful, as if I were nothing more than a confused stranger interrupting her perfect moment. Mother's eyes flicked to mine, sharp, warning, cold, before she smoothly looked away and kept smiling for the cameras. Before I could say anything more, 2 security guards appeared beside me. They moved quietly, professionally. One placed a gentle but firm hand on my elbow. "Ma'am," he said softly, almost kindly, "I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. I just need a moment to—" "Please," the second guard added, his voice low. "Don't make this difficult." They began guiding me toward the door. My feet moved, but my mind screamed to stay. I twisted slightly, desperate to catch Thalia's eyes. "Thalia, you know these are mine. You know what I shared with you." But my sister only tilted her head, giving the camera that same wounded, elegant expression she had perfected over the years. As if I were the one causing trouble on her special day. The door closed behind me with a quiet, final click. The ocean wind hit me harder now, carrying the sharp smell of salt and kelp. I stood alone on the boardwalk, chest rising and falling too fast. My hands trembled at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But mostly, I felt a deep, hollow ache spreading through my ribs, the kind that comes when the people who are supposed to love you look straight through you. Across the street, under the shade of an old, twisted cypress, our silver SUV waited. Torrin Vale sat behind the wheel. Even from here, I could see the pain carved into his face. His jaw was tight. His eyes followed every second of what had just happened. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just watched, helpless and hurting, because he had warned me. Only 3 months ago, I had sat at the family dinner table, heart wide open, spreading out my sketches, my notebooks, my fragile samples of sea glass and wire. I told them everything, every late night, every failed attempt, every quiet dream of turning the ocean's forgotten pieces into something beautiful. I said we could build it together. As a family, Torrin had squeezed my hand under the table that night, his eyes gentle but worried. But I believed in them. I believed in us. Now this. I walked slowly to the car, each step heavier than the last. Torrin leaned over and opened the passenger door without a word. When I slid inside, the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the salt still clinging to my jacket. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stared straight ahead at the gray ocean rolling in the distance, waves crashing against the rocks like they were trying to break something open. Finally, my voice came out raw, barely a whisper. They didn't just steal my ideas. I swallowed hard, fighting the burn behind my eyes. They stole the name I signed on every single piece I ever made. Torin reached over and took my hand. His grip was warm, steady, but I could feel the quiet anger trembling beneath it. Outside, the news crew was still filming. Mother was laughing again. Thalia was posing with one of my necklaces around her neck, the sea glass catching the light exactly the way I had dreamed it would. And I sat there in the passenger seat, heart cracking wide open, feeling the first cold spark of something new ignite deep inside me. Not just pain, not just betrayal, something sharper, something that refused to stay silent any longer. The drive home from Cannon Beach felt endless. Torin kept the radio low, the soft hum of waves still echoing in my ears, even though we were miles inland. I stared out the window at the passing pine trees, my hands folded tightly in my lap so he wouldn't see them shaking. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the house lights were already on. I didn't want to go inside, but I needed answers. I called my mother first. Rhiannon picked up on the third ring, her voice bright and polished, as if the afternoon had never happened. "Nyra, darling, you really shouldn't have made a scene today. It was embarrassing for everyone." My throat tightened. "Mom, those pieces are mine. I spent 7 years making them. You were there when I showed you the first prototypes. How can you stand there and pretend this is Thalia's dream?" There was a short pause. I could hear her sigh, the kind she always gave when she thought I was being difficult. "Sweetheart, family has to stick together. Thalia is better at the business side, the marketing, the branding, talking to people. You're wonderful with your hands, with making beautiful things, but marketing, that's not your strength. Let your sister handle it. This is good for all of us." Her words landed like stones in my stomach. I tried my father next. Cassian answered with a tired voice, the one he used when he didn't want to get involved. "Dad, please, tell me you didn't know." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his tone was flat, almost gentle in its cruelty. "Thalia is better at selling, Nyra. She's always had that gift. You should be proud of her." Proud. The word tasted like ash. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, phone in hand, scrolling through Instagram and TikTok with trembling fingers. There it was, Thalia's new post, a beautifully edited carousel of my designs. Soft music played in the background as she smiled into the camera, her hair catching the golden hour light. Ocean Legacy finally launching the collection that has lived in our hearts for years. So grateful to bring this sister dream to life with my beautiful family. Thank you for all the love and support. No mention of me. Not a single credit. Not even my initials. Comments flooded in. "So inspiring. Love the sister bond. Thalia, you're such a visionary." Each one felt like another small cut. The next few days blurred together in quiet agony. Old customers who used to come straight to my workshop started messaging me, confused. "I saw your pieces in Thalia's new store. I thought you were the artist. I didn't know you were just helping her make them." One woman even asked if I was available for custom work at a lower price, now that the main collection was out. I stopped replying. Torin watched me carefully. He brought me coffee in the mornings, rubbed my shoulders at night, but I could feel his hesitation. He didn't want to push. He didn't want to start a war with my family. Every time I tried to talk about it, he would sigh and say, "I'm on your side, Nyra. But maybe we should wait, let things cool down." Wait. I was so tired of waiting. The isolation crept in slowly, like fog rolling off the Pacific. My phone grew quieter. Friends who once cheered for my little creations now tagged Thalia in their stories. Even Aunt Marin sent a heart emoji under Thalia's post without asking me a single question. Every night I lay awake beside Torin, staring at the ceiling, feeling the slow burn of anger mixing with a deeper, heavier sadness. They had forgotten me, not in loud, dramatic ways. They had simply erased me quietly, politely, and completely. A week later, I found myself alone in my small workshop behind the house. The space smelled of salt, metal, and dried seaweed. Late afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the work table. I stood there for a long time just looking. Scraps of sea glass, half-polished agates. A few unfinished wireframes I hadn't touched since that family dinner 3 months ago. My hands moved on their own, picking up a small piece of deep blue glass I had found on a stormy morning last winter. I had planned to turn it into a pendant, something strong and quiet, like the ocean after a storm. But now, I set it down gently, and then it happened. The tears came without warning. Not loud sobs, not dramatic cries, just silent, shaking tears that rolled down my cheeks and dropped onto the wooden table. I pressed both hands over my mouth to keep any sound from escaping, but my shoulders still trembled. For the first time since that day at the store, the shock began to crack open. What was left underneath was heavier, deeper, a slow, burning rage mixed with a profound loneliness I had never let myself feel before. I cried there in the dim light of my workshop, surrounded by the pieces of myself I had once loved so fiercely. And in that quiet, painful moment, something inside me began to change. The numbness was fading. The grief was settling into something sharper, something that refused to stay buried any longer. The days after that night in the workshop felt heavier than before. I moved through the house like a ghost, speaking little, eating even less. Torin watched me with quiet worry, but he kept his distance, afraid that pushing too hard would make me shatter. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I drove into town to pick up more polishing compound. The streets were slick and gray, the kind of weather that made everything feel muted and lonely. I was standing in the narrow aisle of the old supply store when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Nyra Quill. Is that really you, child? I turned. Elena Voss stood there, silver hair pulled back in a loose braid, her weathered hands still strong from decades of working with metal and stone. She had been my mentor years ago, the one who taught me how to turn ocean waste into something worth keeping. The one who believed in me when no one else did. Elena. My voice came out softer than I intended. She studied my face for a long moment, her sharp blue eyes narrowing with concern. You don't look well, dear. Come, let's get some tea, my treat. We ended up at the small cafe down the street, sitting by the window where rain streaked the glass like tears. Elena stirred her tea slowly, then looked straight at me. I saw the new store, Ocean Legacy. I stiffened. Before I could speak, she continued, her voice low but steady. Thalia came to see me about 6 weeks ago. Said she wanted design references for a family project. Asked to look at my old notebooks, the ones I used when I was teaching you. I thought it was strange, but she was so charming. Said it was all in the family. Elena paused, her fingers tightening around the mug. I let her look. But later, when I saw your pieces in her store, I realized she didn't just look. She copied every technique, every proportion, every trick I showed you. She took it all. The room seemed to tilt. I sat there, the steam from my untouched tea rising between us, while old memories flooded back late nights in Elena's studio, her patient hands guiding mine, telling me my work had a voice worth hearing. And now Thalia had stolen even that. I left the cafe feeling raw, the rain soaking through my coat as I walked back to the car. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. That same evening, my phone rang. It was Jude Harlan. We had grown up together, best friends through middle school and high school before life pulled us in different directions. He had become a lawyer in Portland, sharp and principled, the kind of person who still remembered the promises we made as kids. Nyra, he said, his voice careful, I need to talk to you, in person. We met the next morning at a quiet park overlooking the bay. Jude looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. He pulled a folder from his bag and laid it on the wooden bench between us. I was doing some routine trademark searches for a client, and I saw this. He opened the folder. There it was, the official registration for Ocean Legacy, filed exactly 2 weeks after that family dinner where I had laid my entire heart and every sketch on the table. Thalia's name was listed as the sole owner. No mention of me. Not as co-creator, not as contributor, nothing. Jude watched me closely as the truth sank in. This wasn't an accident, Nyra. This was calculated. She moved fast right after you trusted them with everything. I stared at the documents until the words blurred. All the excuses I had been telling myself. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they planned to credit me later. Maybe family just got carried away, crumbled in that moment. This was deliberate. They had looked me in the eye, listened to my dreams, and then quietly taken everything while I was still smiling. Something inside me cracked wide open. The grief that had been drowning me for weeks suddenly sharpened into something else. Anger, clear, cold, unshakable. I looked up at Jude, my voice steady for the first time in days. I'm not staying quiet anymore. That night, I asked Torin and Jude to come to the house. We sat around the old oak table in the kitchen, the same table where I had once spread out my designs with so much hope. The lamp above us cast warm light, but the air felt heavy. Torin sat beside me, his hand resting gently on my knee. Jude leaned forward, listening. I took a slow, deep breath. For weeks I had carried the silence, the shame, the fear of rocking the boat. No more. I looked at both of them, my voice low but clear. This isn't just about the store. It's not even just about the money I could have made. I paused, feeling the weight of every stolen night, every erased credit, every time my name was quietly removed from my own work. Lần này, tôi sẽ lấy lại không chỉ tiền hay cửa hàng. I swallowed hard, then finished the sentence with quiet fire. I'm going to take back my own story. Torin's eyes widened slightly, a mix of pride and worry crossing his face. Jude gave a small, determined nod. The decision had been made. The first real crack had appeared in their carefully built lie. And for the first time since that day on the boardwalk, I wasn't just surviving the pain. I was ready to fight it. The decision I made that night in the kitchen didn't bring immediate peace. It brought something quieter, something heavier. A silent war had begun. In the weeks that followed, I moved carefully, like someone walking across thin ice. Every morning I woke before dawn, sat at my workshop table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, and began gathering the pieces of my own truth. I dug through old folders and found the original design contracts I had drawn up months before that family dinner. Simple agreements I once hoped we would all sign together. I saved every screenshot from the family group chat where I had shared my early sketches and late-night ideas. I photographed every prototype still sitting on my shelves, time-stamped and dated. I also reached out, quietly, to 2 other local artisans who had crossed paths with Thalia. One was an old friend of hers who admitted, voice hesitant over the phone, that Thalia had asked for inspiration and then stopped returning calls once she got what she needed. The other was a former employee at the new store who had seen my designs printed out on Thalia's desk with notes written in my sister's handwriting. Each piece of evidence felt like another small weight added to my chest. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Unexpected help came from 2 people I never thought would stand beside me. The first was Soren Blake, a freelance investigative reporter for the Coastal newspaper. He had tried to interview Thalia for a feature on local women entrepreneurs weeks earlier, but she had turned him down flat, calling his questions too personal. When he heard whispers about the controversy, he reached out to me. His voice on the phone was calm, measured, but there was a sharp edge of curiosity beneath it. I don't like stories where one person gets erased, he said simply. If you're willing to talk, I'm willing to listen. The second was Dr. Mira Lang, a psychologist and business advisor who ran a small practice near the harbor. A mutual friend had given her my name. During our first meeting, she sat across from me in a sunlit office that smelled of lavender and old books, listening without interruption as I spoke. She didn't offer quick comfort. Instead, she looked at me with quiet understanding and said, "What you're describing is a classic family pattern, one person's success built on another's silence and sacrifice. The question is whether you're ready to stop protecting that pattern." Her words stayed with me long after I left her office. She began teaching me how to protect my mind while I fought for my work, how to breathe through the panic attacks that came at night, how to separate my worth from their approval. Still, the fear never left me completely. I worried I was destroying what was left of my family. I worried Torin would grow tired of the tension. I worried that in the end, I would lose everything I had ever loved about this life by the sea. Then came the night of the grand launch. Thalia had rented the old lighthouse hall overlooking the bay. String lights glowed against the wooden beams. Local reporters, distant relatives, and half the town showed up. From the shadows across the street, I watched people I once called family walk inside, laughing, dressed in their best clothes. I wasn't invited. Not even a text. That exclusion cut deeper than I expected. Instead of crashing the event, I sat in my car with a thick envelope on my lap. Inside were copies of everything I had gathered, carefully organized, anonymously prepared. No note, no signature. I drove to Soren Blake's office after dark and slipped the package through the mail slot. As I walked back to the car, my hands were steady, but my heart raced with a strange mixture of terror and hope. For the first time in months, the pain felt purposeful. The silent war had just grown louder. A few evenings later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, I found myself alone on the rocky beach where I had collected sea glass for years. The wind was strong that night, whipping my hair wildly and carrying the sharp cry of seagulls overhead. Waves crashed against the black rocks with raw power. I stood at the edge of the tide line, salt spray misting my face. In my right hand, I held the very first bracelet I had ever finished, a simple piece made from wire and a single piece of deep green sea glass I found when I was 22. It was rough around the edges, imperfect, but it carried every dream I once had. I turned it slowly between my fingers, feeling its weight, remembering the quiet joy of creation before anyone tried to take it from me. The pain was still there. The fear was still there. But something else had taken root beside them, a cold, clear determination that felt almost peaceful. I was no longer just the sister who had been forgotten. I was ready to fight for what was mine, and I was willing to lose everything, if that was what it took to get my story back. The wind howled louder as the last light of sunset bled across the sky. I closed my eyes, letting the cold air fill my lungs. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. The tide doesn't ask permission before it turns. It simply rises. Months of quiet preparation led me to a small courtroom in Portland on a gray Tuesday morning. The air smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Jude Harlan, my hands folded tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. Across the room, Thalia sat with Dax Voss beside her. She wore a soft blue dress that made her look fragile and wronged. Mother and father were there too, seated just behind them. Rhiannon's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Cassian stared at the floor, shoulders heavy with the weight of everything he had refused to see. Jude presented the evidence methodically: old contracts, time-stamped messages, photographs of my original prototypes, statements from Elena Voss and the two other artisans. Soren Blake's investigative report laid bare the timeline, how the trademark had been filed just 2 weeks after I had trusted my family with my dreams. Dr. Mira Lang had helped me prepare for this day. She taught me to breathe through the panic, to speak from truth instead of pain. Her quiet guidance kept me steady when my voice threatened to break. Thalia's lawyer tried to turn the hearing into a family drama. He spoke of sisterly love, of misunderstandings, of how Thalia had only wanted to honor our shared heritage. Thalia herself wiped tears from her eyes and looked straight at the judge. This was never about stealing, she said, her voice soft and trembling. It was about building something beautiful. Together. Dax nodded beside her, adding how difficult the past year had been for their family. For a moment, the old guilt rose in my chest, the familiar urge to smooth things over, to protect them from discomfort. But I remembered the workshop, the silent tears, the bracelet in my hand on the windy beach. When it was my turn, I spoke quietly but clearly. I loved my family. I trusted them with the most fragile parts of myself. What happened wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice, a deliberate choice to take what wasn't theirs and erase the person who created it. The room grew still. Bit by bit, the truth rose like the tide, undeniable, unstoppable. Public opinion outside the courthouse began to shift, as Soren's article went live. Local news picked up the story. Relatives who had once praised Thalia's vision started asking difficult questions. The pressure on my parents became impossible to ignore. Rhiannon looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Cassian finally lifted his eyes and met mine for a brief second. In that look, I saw regret he would probably never find words for. The ruling came faster than anyone expected. The judge recognized my ownership of the intellectual property. The trademark was ordered to be transferred. Thalia was required to cease using my designs and to compensate for the unauthorized use. We had won, but victory didn't feel loud or triumphant. It felt like the first full breath I had taken in nearly a year. A few weeks later, I reopened my small workshop with a new sign above the door. Thalia Quill. The name carried everything I had lost and everything I had reclaimed. The ocean that had given me the materials. The pen I used to sign my own name again. Torrin stood beside me that first morning, his arm around my waist as the morning light streamed through the windows. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His steady presence had been my anchor through every dark night. One quiet afternoon, my parents asked to meet me at the old lighthouse overlooked the same place where Thalia had held her grand launch. We stood on the wooden platform with the sea stretching endlessly before us. The wind was gentle that day. Rhiannon spoke first, her voice thinner than I remembered. We never thought it would go this far. I looked at her for a long moment. I never thought you would let it, I replied softly. Cassian shifted uncomfortably, his hands deep in his pockets. We're sorry, Nyra, he said. It was the closest he had ever come to an apology. I nodded slowly, but I didn't offer comfort. I didn't reach for them. I'm not here to fix us, I said. I'm here to tell you that I've stopped letting your version of family define me. My work, my name, my peace. They belong to me now. Neither of them argued. There were no dramatic tears or promises of change, just the quiet acknowledgement that something between us had permanently shifted. As I walked away, Torrin waited for me at the end of the path. He took my hand without a word, and we drove home in comfortable silence. That evening, I returned alone to the beach, where everything had begun to change. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep rose and gold. Waves rolled in with steady rhythm, pulling at the shore and then retreating. I stood at the water's edge, barefoot on the cold sand. In my hand was the old bracelet, the very first piece I had ever finished years ago. The wire was slightly bent now. The sea glass had softened with time. I held it for a long moment, feeling every memory it carried, the hope, the betrayal, the long fight back. Then, gently, I opened my fingers and let it fall into the incoming wave. The ocean took it without hesitation, pulling the small bracelet out into the deep. I watched until it disappeared. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they weren't bitter this time. They were the kind that come when you finally set something heavy down. I had protected my ideas. I had refused to let family love become an excuse for disrespect. I had learned to heal myself while still fighting for what was right. And most importantly, I had discovered that justice doesn't always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like the tide. When you find the courage to stand up, gather your evidence, and speak your truth, the current eventually begins to move in your favor. I turned away from the sea and walked back up the beach toward home. The wind at my back felt lighter now. For the first time in years, the future stretched before me wide open and entirely my own. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully only to support production while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.